If you like what you watch, then don't forget to follow us on Facebook and Twitter for the latest updates on The More Show. Remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel for new weekly television and radio shows.
Last night I witnessed the burning of deck chairs on the beach, and they just come down here just to
David Courtney,
kicks, I think.
the guy who with me wrote all of my early songs, and the guy who discovered me actually.
They turned up on my doorstep one day with a little guy named Leo Sayer. I wanted to make some demos in my studio, and it all went from there.
My next guest is producer, composer and recording artist David Courtney. Now, throughout David's 45-year career, he has worked with many legendary music artists and is the man responsible for discovering the international recording artist Leo Sayer. The trailer you've just seen is for his audio biography, The Truth Behind the Music, which documents his life and gives a unique insight into the music industry. David Courtney, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
It's such a pleasure to have you on. Wow. I've listened to The Truth Behind the Music audio biography, and it just pulled me in.
Good.
I mean, this is the first time you've done something like this, isn't it?
Yeah, it was a bit of a daunting task when I took it on. When I decided to do it, start with a blank piece of paper, you think, well, now how do I go from here? Because writing songs is one thing, but then to write, generally, certainly writing your life story, you think, well, where do you start? How do you kick it off? And lucky enough, because my life has been in music in its own, by the nature of what it is like a time machine. It transports you back in time when you hear a song. It'll do it to you, it'll do it to everybody.
It did. I mean, some classic tracks are on there, aren't there?
And so when I was doing this, I've managed to keep all the early recordings that I did, even when I was a kid in the band, managed to keep hold of all this. So when it came to starting this off, I would put a piece of that music on and I'll be back there. So it really helped.
Whose idea was it to do this? I mean, was it just something your idea, was it? Yeah.
Yeah, and I wanted to do it a little bit differently. I didn't want it to be just another printed book or just an audio book. I came up with the term audio biography so that I could create something a little bit different, so it'd be more entertaining. So it's really a combination between an audio book and a music album, so it's conceptual in that way.
It's unique in that way as well.
Yeah.
I mean, I've heard something similar to this, like I might have called a soundscape, but to put it into someone's life as well as a biography, I mean, it's just, it's
and music
wonderful.
All the way through, you see, even underneath the narration. And again, with the narration, there would be no point in me bringing in an actor to do it, because the words need to come from my mouth and from my heart, so...
Of course they do. Of course. No,
I don't profess to be a thespian.
Well, let's just start at the beginning of this audio biography. Now, you start off with a story about your childhood, where your dad found you in a fridge. Just tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, I was one of those sort of kids. I was always into trouble, always trouble. Not in a bad way that he had police knocking at his door, but I was always, what's David up to now, sort of thing. A bit like, what was it, Just William?
Yeah.
And on this particular occasion, I was about 10. And we were on holiday in Belgium, in a hotel in Belgium, Ostend, Belgium. And I'd gone to play with some kids down in this deserted basement area of the hotel, and my parents were upstairs in the lounge. And we were playing hide and seek. And so I decided, well, I'm going to find a good place to hide. And I went behind a counter, and I found this empty refrigerator. All the shelves had been taken out. And I thought, well, there's a good place to hide. No one's going to find me there. And I managed, I don't know how, but I managed to squeeze myself inside with my legs up underneath my chin, and I pulled the door to, and I remember this very clearly, and it locked. And it felt like eternity. And panic, obviously you would panic, wouldn't you, naturally. And it could only have been a matter of I guess, minutes, because otherwise I don't think I'd be here telling the tale.
That's
but
right.
he had some inkling that
Intuition kind of
yeah,
thing, your
there was
father did,
something.
yeah.
Well, as I say, I was always one of those kids. So it was like, well, I think I'll go and see what David's up to, because he's been away for a little bit here. And he came straight down to this basement area and walked straight up to this fridge, because the other kids, they were all hiding and they didn't know where I was, and he opened the door and dragged me out.
Incredible.
I mean,
and there's a story of like intuition.
But one thing I can promise you is the light does go out when the door closes. I now know that.
Well, you hadn't left the planet yet, so
exactly.
Thankfully, because you went on to do and had an amazing career. Now, you was always into music. Even at 14, you had your first band. Now, was your father supportive, or did he want you to go work for him?
Oh yeah, he was a self-made man. He came out of the RAF after the Second World War, and what they gave the ex-servicemen, they gave him what they call a D-mob suit, and in our case, they gave us a prefab. They called it prefabs. They're like a single-story structure.
Yeah.
And on a sort of a council estate area, and that was it. And he built his business up from there in cars, to the extent we eventually got a car dealership and all that. So the natural thing was, will I take over when he, steps down? But I had no interest in it. My only interests were in music and football.
Yeah.
And I was in the football team at school, and I used to enjoy that. But I always knew I was average. It wasn't. I didn't stand out as there's something. I was no Wayne Rooney. Okay. So. But music was the passion for me, even at an early stage, sitting with my ear to the radiogram, listening to radio every Saturday morning and watching those very early music TV shows, and that's really where my inspiration came to.
So what would you say is your sort of first big break in the music ladder then? Oh,
the first break came after about 8 years. I mean, from forming a band at school with my best mate, and as a drummer, I decided I wanted to play the drums, which I talk about in the book.
Yeah.
Joining all the different organisations so I could play the drums in the band, like the Sally Army and all that, and then none of them would let me do it. I got to carry the flag instead, and I wasn't impressed with that. Anyway, I became professional at the age of 16, and then we were playing in clubs up and down the country, in the chicken and basket circuit, as they call it, and then we had a residency in a club in London called the Bag and Owls, which was the club in the 60s, frequented by all the big stars of the day. They were the audience every night. I was 16 playing the drums, and there was the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, the Walker Brothers, the Kinks. That was the audience every night. It's quite an extraordinary experience.
Absolutely.
And I progressed from there to the point back in about 1968, 69, when the band had it, and I really wanted to move on. I came back into what I always refer to as Civvy Street, because it is like coming out of what was not a normal lifestyle for a 16-year-old boy.
No.
Back into normal reality.
Well, I mean, it just goes on, doesn't it? I mean, one of your tracks, which you're going to play now, is The Show Goes On. And just briefly, just tell us about...
The Show Must Go On, yeah.
Tell us about that.
Well, what happened there was, when I came back into Civvy Street, so to speak, once I got itchy feet to get back into the industry, rather than going back as a musician, I wanted to wander into the other side and discover talent. And so I held auditions in Brighton, and I put an ad in the paper, held auditions, sat there with the desk and the clipboard, and they came on one after the other. And this little kid called Gerard Sayer was in a band called Patches. They were about band number 47 or something on the bill at the time. And then I heard this voice, and that was the beginning of that. And that developed into writing then with, as he became Leo, because I gave him his name a little later on, and producing, and got together again with Adam Faith, who was my former employer at the time. And,
okay. Well, let's just listen to that track just very quickly. Okay. This is The Show Must Go On.
The Show Must Go On.
I won't let the show go on, but I won't let the show. Oh, I won't let the show go on.
Okay, so just before that track we heard there, you were talking about Leo Sayers. Now, that wasn't his original stage name, was it?
No, he was Gerard Sayer, and one of the first things that happened was there were two very important moves here. One was that we recognised very quickly that he was a standalone artist, so really broke him away from the band. So the next move was, right, okay, now we're going to market him. This is Adam and I, and the first thing on the card was like, well, we've got to do a name change here, because Gerard Sayer wasn't particularly rock and roll, as they say. So I went through the local paper one night and I came across the star signs, and there was this drawing of a lion with the lion's mane for the sign of Leo.
Yeah.
And it just leapt out at me. So like, this is it. He looks like that. So.
Well, did he initially like the name
No.
as well? No.
No, a lot of people find it very difficult to change their name, don't they? You know, so he kept the Sayer part, but yeah, Leo and Adam. As soon as I told it to Adam, he said, "Oh, that's it. What a great name. We're not going to call him anything else. If he doesn't answer to that name, we're going to ignore you." You know, so he embraced it very
So then a new
soon.
chapter took place in all your lives then, didn't it, I suppose?
Yes, and then, you know, and then we developed the clown, the look of the clown, and it was all part of the package of that first album with The Show Must Go On, the fairground organ that you heard earlier on there on the track. That was an actual fairground organ that we went and recorded. And the whole thing had this sort of circus and theatrical feel, so it was very conceptual.
I mean, you've worked with some big names, haven't you?
Yeah.
And, you know, working with Paul McCartney...
And another one now.
Yeah, yeah. Well, thank you very much. But with Paul McCartney, I mean, that must have been like a dream come true, was it not?
Oh, yeah. I was a massive Beatle fan. Massive Beatle fan. And so when the situation arrived, and that came about when we were doing what was going to be Adam's first album for about 18 odd years, I think it was, following a very severe car crash that he had, that I was supposed to have been in that night when it happened, and I didn't go that particular night. And the album, Adam and I went to Nassau to write the album. It was called I Survive, and when we were recording it, you do those sort of fantasy moments when you're producing. You say, "Oh, wouldn't it be great to have Paul McCartney singing back
So you just
vocals?"
projected that thought out there?
I said it. I said, "Oh, it'd be great on this particular track." And of course, Adam, you know, had the ear to a lot of people, and the doors were all open, and he knew Paul anyway.
Yeah.
So he said, "Right, I'll give him a call," and he gave him a call, and Adam and his wife Jackie went out to dinner with Paul and Linda, and there's a funny story there that I put in the book about when they went out to that dinner and for Adam to romance him into doing the album, and they were sitting in what was the RAC club in London, one of these stuffy gentlemen's club.
Yes.
But they were the only people in the lounge, and there was this big stage with a portrait of the Queen and this beautiful grand piano. And Adam turned around to Paul and said, "Go and play Let It Be for me, it's my favourite song." And he agreed to do it. So the two of them climbed up on the stage, and then Paul's singing Let It Be on the piano, and Adam's standing there next to him. The next thing, this concierge comes in, shouts across the room, "Get off that piano and tell them." So Adam said, "Do you realise who that is and how much
And how
money
much you could have,
people..."
yeah, absolutely.
And he said, "I don't care." He was a real job's worth. He said, "I don't care. Get him off that piano." Anyway.
You saw the funny side of it, obviously.
Oh, and
yeah,
Paul did as well.
Yeah.
But he did. He agreed to do the album. So about a week later, Paul and Linda came to the studio, and I'm sitting there waiting, thinking, "Oh God, this is wonderful, you know, to be working with Paul." And he came in, and we were chatting there, and he really liked the song we were asking him to perform on. In fact, he performed on 2 in the end, and that was the first time for me to work with was a hero and a legend.
Well, look, we've got so much more to get into, David. So we're just going to take a break there. So I'll continue to talk to David after the break, and we're just going to play out with Shooting Star.
And there'll be dancing in the moonlight.
Visit themoreshow.co.uk/shop to purchase products and services from your favourite past guests. If you're new to this site, you can also catch up on the previous television and radio shows through YouTube and the More Show website.
The shooting star.
Welcome back. I've just been joined by record producer David Courtney. Now, David, just before the ad break there, and just into the ad break, we were just playing the track there, Shooting Star. Now, just tell us a bit about the background to that track.
That version you heard was a version that I cut myself last year on an album that I brought out, which I called The Show Must Go On. had some various artists on the album, but I covered the one-man band track, the Shooting Star, and a couple of others. The background of Shooting Star goes back to 1976, 77. I'd always had an interest in ufology. I don't know really where it came from, but I was interested in it. And that inspired me to write that song, because the lyrical content of Shooting Star is all about that sort of, you know, visitation type of scenario.
Yeah.
And I landed up giving that song and another one called Who Were You in the Moonlight to a new duo at the time called Dollar, who were David Van Day and Teresa Bazar, who had broken away from Guys and Dolls.
Yeah.
And they'd formed this duo, and it was signed up by a record label, and I knew the guy who owned the record label, and he asked if I had any songs, and I was saving those two for myself. And when he heard the demo, he begged me to let him have them, so I agreed, and they were, I'm fortunate enough, they were both hits. Later on, when I moved to America, I'd always had the idea of expanding on Shooting Star as a concept. Not just an album, but there was like an idea of a stage show. It would have been like a musical version of Close Encounters, right? If you can get your head around that one. So what happened was I'd recorded an album, and I'd got to know Mike Love of the Beach Boys at the time, and I remember playing him the album one day, and I said, check this out, see what you think. And he heard it, and he said, we're looking for material for the Beach Boys. Will you let us have the album? And I said, oh, no, I'm keeping this for myself. Thank you very much. You know, no, it was a nice gesture.
Yeah,
but
absolutely, yeah.
Anyway, we developed a script for this, and I got to meet a lady called Julia Phillips, who had been the producer on Close Encounters. And she fell in love with the album. And she could see exactly what I wanted to do. But one of the things which you have to do when you're putting movies together in Hollywood is you have to have the package. So it's not just the script or even the music, which usually comes last.
Yeah.
It's who's the starring role. And through another connection there, they said Michael Jackson would love this because he would be into this particular subject matter and the music. And so they sent the album to him, and he really liked it. And we were sitting, you were always sitting in this business waiting for the phone to ring. I refer to it in the audiobook as the Del Monte moment. You know, always waiting for that ad when the guy comes in and he's bought the oranges, and you go, oh, it's Mr. Del Monte, you say yes, you know. So you're always waiting for that phone call, and we're always waiting for the phone call from Michael's people. And what had happened was he was waiting for a phone call himself from Steven Spielberg, because he's had this long desire to want to play Peter Pan. And Spielberg was making the movie of Peter Pan. And it went on, and eventually the momentum got lost, and it got lost for him as well, because Spielberg landed up making the movie for Disney, and it became Hook.
Hook, yeah.
And he used Robin Williams instead of Michael, and I think that was one of the big disappointments. So by that stage, the heat had gone off.
But to have those connections, I mean, that's
to be that close, because it would have been
yeah.
quite extraordinary. And you see, it was probably his loss. You see, he should have chosen, and he would have done it, but never mind.
Well, I mean, you also worked with other artists such as, Eric Clapton as well.
Yeah, Eric. That came about when, well, the first association was with Roger Daltrey in the early stages when we were introduced to Roger when we were making Leo's first album.
And he's from The Who. Yeah.
Roger's the lead singer of The Who, and we got to meet him through another connection, a guy called Keith Ortham, who was their PR person. Because Roger had built a new studio in his house, so we were looking to record the second part of Silverbird, the album, and it was suggested to go and meet Roger. We forged a relationship almost immediately. As soon as Roger heard what we were doing, he said, I want you guys to write my debut solo album and for you and Adam to produce it. That was for myself and Adam to produce it. So what a platform, what a kickstart, you know. You had Roger Daltrey singing our songs, which are produced, and him out there talking about this guy Leo Sayer. You couldn't have scripted it better to have had such a kickstart. You know?
Absolutely not. So just moving on from there and touching on some of your work. Now, tell us about some of your albums that you've done as well.
I did my first solo album. That was a long one. It was a bit like this album now.
Yeah.
It was something I always wanted to do because I've always been the backroom boy. You know, even as a drummer, I was at the back, and but I chose to be that person and be in the wings, so to speak. So there was always that burning desire. So one day I'll step out and do my thing. But when you work with artists, the caliber, vocal ability of people like Leo and Roger Daltrey and all these people, it does tend to make you shy away if you haven't got one of those sort of voices. However, I did make my album, and it was a fantastic experience. I worked closely with the Beatles engineer Jeff Emmerich, who engineered all those records, and Sgt. Pepper and all that. He was the engineer. I co-produced it with another guy called Andrew Powell, who produced Kate Bush and Pilot and all those people, and the Alan Parsons Project. And yeah, we had a fantastic experience making that album. I did an opening track called Silverbird of the song that we had on the Leo album, which was just a little ditty thing. I wanted to make it a big instrumental, so we had Abbey Road Studios, 100-piece orchestra, choir.
I've heard that track. It's incredible. It
was
really
like,
does.
It's like a Busby Berkeley.
Yeah, but even now, it still
Hollywood.
stands the test of time, doesn't it?
It's quite extraordinary, yeah. And the story that went on behind there, recording in Abbey Road, recording that track. Yeah, so that was the starting point for this album, which was quite eclectic in the musical mix that I had in there, but
so I mean,
did well in America, didn't do so well over here.
Yeah, well, you've actually done quite well in America, haven't you? You know, you've had many ups and downs in your career, haven't you?
Oh yeah.
And it's not always been very favourable for you, but it's been a process, hasn't it?
It certainly has, and I like to think of that term character building, because you know, when you're in the midst of some of those darker moments, you think, oh, this is pretty awful, you know. Death of someone close, or you know.
Because you had to tell your mother, didn't you, that your father had passed on?
Yeah, well, they were in a car
crash. Yeah,
in a car crash that happened outside of the house that I just bought 20 minutes after I'd already left that property to come back into Brighton, where I live. I was having the house renovated, and I was right near a main road, and he'd come past there with my mother and my uncle in the car 20 minutes later and had a head-on collision with a van. He died instantly. And my mother, who I didn't realise at the time, was also in the car, and she was taken to intensive care, and she was nearly a goner. And it was one of those situations where, you know, the shock of knowing that he had died would have killed her. So I had to keep it going for quite a while to let her think that he was in the ward upstairs, still alive, sending messages down to keep... Because when she did come out of her coma, that's the first thing she asked for was him.
Of course.
So I had to do that every day. Until the point where they said, right, now we're reaching the point now where you've got to now tell the truth, because if you don't, and if you delay it any longer, it'll have an adverse effect. So I had to sit there and tell her that I'd already actually, prior to that, of course, I had to deal with a burial and everything. Now, again, you know, life doesn't come with these manuals. How do you deal with this?
It does
so,
not.
And unfortunately, again, in his will, he never determined whether he wanted to be buried or cremated, so I had to make a judgment. I couldn't talk to her about it, so it was really
Did you find at the time that your work, your music, was helping you to get through this period of your life?
I didn't stop and think about songwriting when this was all happening to me. It came out later on. I mean, I wrote a song later on called Why Do the Good Guys Die? Yeah, I mean, I had friends around me, so that was good. You know, there was Adam, there was, you know, other people close by. So that helped get you through it. But I had my sister with me who had to come and live with me because she was 13, and she, well, you can imagine the shock it was to her. She was so much younger, you know. So having to take her underneath my wing was something else. You know, suddenly you become the head of the family.
Yes.
And it's quite an extraordinary feeling. Yeah, music, of course, the wonderful thing about being blessed to be able to create is that you have got an outlet. Whereas a lot of people don't have that, you see. Maybe some people can sit down and write, but yeah, through music...
But for you, your outlet was the musical expression.
The emotion comes through that, It's a vehicle to pour it out.
What was your last album, by the way, as well?
My last album, the one I released last year, which I called The Show Must Go On.
The Show Must Go On, that was the most latest one, yeah. And if you could have chosen any track to write, what would it have been, do you think? Well,
you mean someone else's song?
Yeah, if it had been someone else's track, what would you have...
Well, it reminds me of one of the stories in the book when I was asked that same question by Nigel Lawson, the then Chancellor of the Exchequer, when Maggie Thatcher was in. I was at a dinner with him one night at the Savoy Hotel, and he asked me that question.
Yeah.
If you could have written any song, what would it be? Thinking I would have chosen something like, I don't know, My Way or something.
Yeah.
And I said to him, oh no, Happy Birthday. And he said, what? I said, yeah, Happy Birthday. He said, why? It's not exactly a great sounding song. I said, do you know how many times Happy Birthday is played? And he was trying to get his head around it, because I was trying to educate him
Yeah,
about
with the
royalties.
yeah.
And as it happened, by pure chance, the reason why we were at this dinner was because we were celebrating the Savoy Hotel's 100th anniversary. And just as I'd finished this conversation, the Coldstream Guards came in the room playing Happy Birthday. And then he said,
Synchronicity,
I
eh?
understand now, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And with your work and the amazing journey that you've been on, have you any regrets?
Any regrets? I guess if there was to be any regret, it would be maybe I should have stepped forward earlier. I should have come out of the background and come forward earlier. So I do regret that, yeah. I think it was there for me to do it, but I shied away from it. And when I had that album out in America, although it did well in America, they did say to me, they weren't sure about, because I'd never done a live performance.
Yeah.
If I'd have stepped out then and come full hog, it probably would have done a lot better than it did. But I, again, chose to stay back. So that's the only regret.
Well, I think you've had an amazing career, and it's not over yet, is it?
The show must go on.
The show must go on. And the last track we're going to play out is, Why Is Everyone Going Home?
Oh, right.
So just tell us about that track as well.
Yeah, well, the track itself, Why Is Everybody Going Home, I wrote with Leo, and we recorded it on the first Silverbird album. It's always been my favourite song out of all of them, to be honest with you. It was the first time I ever heard an orchestra play on a song that I'd written, so that was quite emotional, just to be in the room when the strings are welling up.
Yeah.
And I got to know a guy who's still a great friend of mine to this day, who's a renowned American poet and lyricist called Stephen Kalinich, writes with Brian Wilson of the Beach Boys and that. But he's a renowned poet, he's fantastic. And Stevie had written this wonderful poem called If You Knew, and I had this idea of bringing him reciting If You Knew and bringing it together with Why Is Everybody Going Home, because lyrically the two have got this theatrical, very meaningful track.
Yeah.
And the result is what you will hear.
Okay, and where can people buy the album from?
It's I embraced the latest technology, Kevin, so I've only released it as a download, so it's on iTunes and Amazon and all that, rather than the CD version. Because although it's 3 hours and something odd long, it takes about 5 minutes to download it, which
absolutely.
is fantastic, isn't it?
Yeah.
But people are going around with iPods and all that, so I figured that's the way to go. And so it's on iTunes and Amazon, and you can read more about it on my website, davidcourtney.co.uk.
Okay, we'll put all the links on our website. And David Courtney, thank you so much for joining us.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Kevin.
For more information, visit my website, themoreshow.co.uk, and click on Past Guests. You can also follow us on Facebook and Twitter for the latest updates on the show. So until next time, thanks for watching.
Have you stood before the wind and let it blow your blues so far?
If you like what you watch, then don't forget to follow us on Facebook and Twitter for the latest updates on The More Show. Remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel for new weekly television and radio shows.